1. Thank you, Chairperson. I'd like to introduce 3 extensions from Cloud and Opposition. 1. Ongoing religious expression is critical for having constructive political dialogue. Secondly, why this is a disproportionate infringement of religious rights. Thirdly, why prohibition undermines moderate engagement and thereby fragment and polarize society. All the rebuttals to the other side of the house will be incorporated into each of my extensions. Firstly, ongoing religious expression is critical. We believe religious-related issues are main agenda in election. Religious expression in politics is indispensable for voters to engage with and make an informed decision for 3 levels of analysis. Number 1, what is the context of a multi-religious society which directly clashes with closing government? We are talking about countries like Malaysia, Philippines, United States. We agree with the closing government that oftentimes conflicts are very likely to happen quite easily. That is why in order to reduce conflicts, active political dialogue is necessary. Oftentimes political parties in parliament advocate for different religious-related political agenda, such as setting quota, or funds to church and subsidy to school, or tax exemption. Yes, we agree with government that majority are strong, but they strategically make concession and compromise their interests in order to reach certain consensus. Let's say we would like to push the agenda in exchange for accepting your advocacy. This is what's happening inside the parliament because it makes what strategically makes sense for a political party to compromise certain agenda to sustainably gain presence and expand seats. Or they sometimes formulate coalition with different religious party even inside the parliament. And moreover, let me analyze the voters' composition. Vast majority of voters are moderate and are open-minded. There are some like radical conservative, some radical progressive secular, but vast majority of voters are moderate. They understand the necessity of compromisation and concession. Thus, even in the status quo, because of a political expression, certain level of concession is happening right now in the parliament, and that is good. Secondly, considering the fact that concession is made in parliament, it is critical for minority groups to deliver their political objectives inside politics by having a lot of religious expression. For example, in Singapore, the Jehovah's Witness is a sect small minority. They oppose use of weapon in general, so they oppose introduction of conscription and military service in Singapore. But the important thing is they need to frame their agenda as a political agenda rather than religious agenda in order to access media and more media coverages and articles or airtime slots in TV. It is necessary for them to have a religious expression, especially in politics, to guarantee that their voices are heard in media. That is why we think this is critically necessary. Number 3, participation by voters. OJ explained that, the populism is a problem. The pious believers automatically follow leaders. I think that is good. If religious leader join the discourse in parliament, the followers automatically follow that, and that means we can expect active political participation right now in the status quo. Through active participation, people comprehend the religious controversy and the political controversy, thus make informed decision about the policy. Therefore, the outcome of election will be more legitimate compared to the paradigm in which we have no political expression at all. Considering this fact, second extension, why this is a disproportionate infringement of religious rights? For 2 reasons. Number 1, outward expression is the core part of religious identity and autonomy. In order for religion to exist at all, they need to expand membership. They need to seek for political protections. For example, tax exemption or subsidy to their religious school or protection of churches. They need to publicize their faith. They need to publicize their position to each policy and manifesto. Otherwise, they cannot exist at all. Therefore, political participation, in order for them to take political participation, religious expression is fundamental and rudimentary. Secondly, more importantly, it is hard to distinguish religious issues and other political issues because for many people, religion is the foundation of value judgment. People have a different conception of family law and how they construct community. Abortion, contraception, sex education, gay marriages are all related to their family planning. If you value communal bonds and community value, you prefer small government rather than welfare state. If you oppose abortion, you are probably pro-choice, pro-life over pro-choice. You can't single out economic policy only. You can't single out welfare policy only. All aspects of identities are interconnected. All aspects of policies are inextricably interconnected. Thereby, you can't say that welfare policy is more important than religious policy. Everything is connected. Therefore, conclusion is denying religious expression is qualitatively tantamount to denying political expression substantially. Thus, this is disproportionate intervention and infringement of religious rights. Moving on to the final extension. Why this model of prohibition undermines moderate engagement and fragment society even further? For 4 reasons. 1. Small sects will be invisible if we prohibit religious expressions. Like predominant denomination, the majority religions can easily access media resources. They have capital. They can proselytize their faith even outside politics. That reinforces their power and presence and creates the society, makes society more exclusionary to religious sects that are already marginalized in the status quo. Secondly, if prohibition happens, what happens is that the conversation about politics and religion will only happen inside the family and the private sphere. For example, the parents who already have strong religious bias influence their children, therefore younger generations are less likely to be open-minded when they become adults. Well, for even adults, if they perpetuate pre-existing values, they have less chance and motivation to interact with people from different religious backgrounds. So community and private sector like family stay very monolithic if we lose political discussion or if we lose media broadcasting about religious position about each policy. Number 3, after taking proposal, if prohibition happens, what happens is that radical conservatives in religious group advocate for values in public and because they cannot rely on politicians after taking a proposal. So they highlight the negative aspect of other religious institutions. Then other religious institutions counter back and the hostility and tension get exacerbated in the long term. Finally, violence and terrorism. If minorities cannot deliver their political objectives in a legitimate political arena, what they do is they resort to violence and terrorism in order to vocalize their grievances. The newspaper company in France was attacked by Islamic fundamentalists because for them that was the only way to gravitate attention from the public and deliver and vocalize their political grievances. And Boko Haram and Taliban are doing the same things for the exact same reasons. We need to include those kind of minorities inside the legitimate political arena in order to reduce use of violence and terrorism. We are happy to oppose. Thank you.
In 3, 2, 1. So we say that opening government mainly talked about conflicts, opening opposition mainly talked about rights, closing government mainly talked about like minorities. But we say that on closing opposition, we say that we're much better in all of these kind of standards, and that's why we're so proud to oppose. So a couple of things. Firstly, I'd like to be talking about which side is actually better in terms of political discussion, right? So we think that the context that we're talking about is like multi-religious countries. So it's most likely going to be countries in which citizens are rather open to different religions or different ideologies, as our first speaker already talked to you about. But let's also engage to what like the concerns of the government side, right? So what opening government mainly talked about was like how maybe there could be worse political discussion because these politicians would have wishy-washy views. There will be like further political apathy, and there will be like more dominant political parties, right? A couple of responses. Firstly, about the wishy-washy views, right? So firstly, we think that just because we allow some kind of religious expression doesn't really mean that politics will suddenly become wishy-washy, right? Because we think that a concept of actually allowing religious expression is just for people to understand the logic behind certain laws, right? But because we think that at the end of the day, if people want support for the kind of laws or the kind of policies that they pass, they can't just like push like wishy-washy laws under the name of religion. They have to make sure that these policies are actually met. So we don't think that suddenly like politics or laws or would suddenly degrade because people have an incentive to be re-elected, people have an incentive to be supported, and they wouldn't be supported if they just like give out like wishy-washy views. But secondly, what opening up government talks about was the fact that like they would have like more political apathy. Firstly, we think that this isn't really true because although some people may not really understand like difficult politics, we think that these people understand religion. But secondly, even if this is not the case, we think that at the end of the day, we still cater to some of the most vulnerable stakeholders, which I'll be talking about in later on in the speech. And thirdly, we think that like political apathy isn't something that's very exclusive in today's debate because like because like political apathy would happen on either side of the house, even like whether or not like we allow religion or not, because many of these people don't like many of these people. It's not because many of these people have different reasons as to why they don't vote. But third thing that opening government talks about is the fact that like there'll be more dominant political parties. But first response is the fact that like we think that like genocide or those kind of conflicts wouldn't really suddenly happen in countries that have multi-religious systems, because these countries are probably more progressively developed than other countries. So there would most likely still be a clear check and balance system in which like there suddenly wouldn't be a dominant political party just because like there'll be some kind of like dominant religion. So we think that like based on the idea that like most of the harms that aside opening government talks about is like contingent on the idea that like there will be sudden like the policies will suddenly become like really bad, like suddenly changed for the worse. And because we don't think that this would like suddenly change for the worse, in fact we think that this would actually be better, because our first speaker has already talked to you about the fact that there will be more informed decision through things like political dialogue, right? So we think that at the end of the day, when like the majority of these voters are rather neutral and they understand the necessity of concessions, we think that they can have a lot more informed decisions than on-site government. That's why we think that we're much better than side opening government. But secondly, what does CG talk to you about? CG talk to you about like how they can promote efficiency in discussion, because there wouldn't be unnecessary conflicts. But firstly, we think that one response to this is that politics isn't enough to cover all the issues, as our first speaker explicitly highlighted, right? They think that political discussion is different from things like religious beliefs, but it's actually very similar. Right? We think that, as our first speaker already explained, everything is being interconnected, and we think that at the point at which you don't allow religious expression, you're also not allowing people to express their political views. We think that this is fundamentally very problematic. Thirdly, we think that what the opening opposition really talked about was the fact that like religion was fundamentally important to the individual, but we say that like instead of just talking about like fundamental rights, we think that there are practical benefits as well, right? Although we concede to the fact that that these rights are fundamentally necessary, we think that there would be more fundamental benefits that the side opening opposition didn't really capitalize about, which is the fact that there will be more informed decision because there will be more political dialogue. We think that the coalition between different religions can happen, and that's why we think that we can have a lot more better political discussion through more representation of different religious groups, right? But secondly, is it justified for the government to prohibit this? We don't think that it's really justified, right? Because we think that at the end of the day, like religious expression isn't really different from other types of expression, from things like hate speech, which also has the same potential to create some kind of tension, right? But we can't prohibit these kind of things in like politics, this political discussion, because we think that everything, like including hate speech and including like a religious expression, is something that's worth talking about in the political sphere, because this forms a fundamental core for human being, and also because we can recognize problems that would otherwise be left out on side government. So thirdly, like who actually needs political expression the most? We think that this was a very big clash in today's debate. So I think an opening government and closing government mainly talks about like minorities and how like they are going to be more suppressed on our side of the house because there will be more dominant like religious groups and they're going to be coercive. However, we say that denying them of some kind of voice in the first place is even more problematic, because at least on our side of the house, we allow them to have some kind of political view, and we think that this is very important because these people usually don't have other alternatives, whereas like big religious groups have other alternatives. As our first speaker talked to you about the fact that big religion can still have access to big media anyway, so they probably will still have some kind of representation. Whereas once you don't allow like these kind of religious minorities to get any kind of discussion running in this political sphere, we think that they would be cut off from all types of outlets to express their political views, because firstly they can't get access to media, but secondly because this is the only way for them to get some kind of following or sponsorship, right? We think that when we allow there's more minorities, religious minorities or different types of religious views, it's a lot more likely that they'll have like some kind of some kind of party that represents them, right? Whereas all like opening government or closing government, they don't allow these kind of parties to represent them in any way. We think that the point in which we still allow some kind of representation, we're so proud to oppose.